years. When you thought of great gospel music, the names Guy Penrod and Wes Hampton often came to mind. Their voices, powerful and full of faith, touched the hearts of millions, especially during their time together in the Gaither vocal band. They weren't just singers, they seemed like brothers, their harmonies creating music that lifted spirits and brought people closer to their beliefs. Together on stage, they made moments that fans would never forget. But as time went on, something changed. People started to notice that Guy and Wes weren't performing together anymore. There were no new pictures of them together, and they stopped showing up at the same events. At first, many fans thought it was just a short break, something normal in the busy world of music. However, as months turned into years with no sign of them reuniting, questions started to pop up. Were they fighting? Did life just pull them in different directions? What nobody knew then was that both Guy and Wes were going through their own tough times, not with each other, but inside themselves. For Guy Penrod, it was a mix of feeling worn out and dealing with a health scare that put his voice at risk. Doctors told him he needed to rest his voice, and he was simply exhausted after years of constant performing. He had to make the hard choice to step back from the spotlight to recover, not just for his career, but for his health. Looking back, Guy realized he had been giving so much of himself without taking time to recharge his spirit. Meanwhile, Wes Hampton faced a different kind of challenge. It wasn't about his health, but about a misunderstanding. Some old private messages he had sent, offering guidance to young musicians, were shared online without the full story. Even though his messages were meant to be helpful and based on his faith, some people in the gospel music community judged him harshly, accusing him of going against his beliefs. Instead of getting angry and defending himself loudly, Wes chose to be quiet. He felt that sometimes silence is the most loving response. He took a step back and focused on prayer and his faith. During this period, the close bond between Guy and Wes seemed to fade. It wasn't because they were upset with each other, but because they were each dealing with their own heavy burdens in silence. Guy was on a path to heal physically and spiritually, while Wes was hurting from feeling misunderstood. Neither of them reached out to the other, and the silence between them grew, making fans even more worried. But behind this quietness, there was no bad blood. They were like two brothers in faith who had gotten lost in their own struggles, unsure how to find their way back to each other. Then, something unexpected happened. Both Guy and Wes were invited separately to a private retreat for men in the Highlands. They didn't even know the other would be there. It wasn't planned as a reunion or for any public attention. On the second night, during a time of worship, as everyone sang the familiar hymn, "Great is Thy Faithfulness," Guy looked up and saw Wes singing with tears in his eyes. Without hesitating, Guy walked over and put his hand on Wes's shoulder, simply saying, "I miss my brother." Wes, holding back his own emotions, replied, "I never stopped being one." There were no cameras, no reporters, just two friends praying, forgiving each other in silence, the way true brotherhood often heals. Today, both Guy and Wes are back in ministry, though not in the same way they used to be. Guy has returned to music more quietly, releasing personal songs and spending more time with his family. Wes is now mentoring young people in worship and supporting those who might feel overlooked. They don't often share a stage anymore, and maybe they don't need to. True healing doesn't always require a public show. Sometimes, the most important mending happens in private. Their story ain't one of fighting or betrayal. It's a human story. It reminds us that even those who lead us in faith are still people with their own weaknesses and challenges. They can get tired, feel alone, and be misunderstood. But through God's grace, they can also find their way back. Guy and Wes didn't let the silence create lasting bitterness. Instead, they allowed their faith to guide them through their pain. They stepped away from the pressure, not from each other. And when the difficult times passed, they were still standing, perhaps changed and quieter, but whole again. What really happened between Guy Penrod and Wes Hampton? Life happened. with its difficulties and misunderstandings. But grace happened too, and so did healing. They chose to value each other even when they were apart. Their time in the Gaither vocal band had already made them legends in gospel music. Guy, with his long hair and deep voice, and Wes, with his smooth high notes and uplifting spirit, were a perfect match. Offstage, they prayed together and supported each other. For over 10 years, their bond felt unbreakable, which is why the silence was so noticeable. At first, fans thought their separate appearances were just due to scheduling. But when they didn't see them together, and there were no new projects or messages from them as a pair, people got worried. They asked, "Is Guy okay? Where is Wes?" But there were no public explanations. The gospel music world, which values community and openness, felt their silence deeply. Some people guessed at arguments behind the scenes, while others whispered about personal troubles. However, those who knew Guy and Wes understood the truth. It wasn't about drama. It was about two men of God carrying heavy burdens they didn't expect. For Guy, the breaking point came after a very demanding tour. One night during rehearsal, he couldn't breathe properly and had to stop singing. His team took him to a doctor, who diagnosed him with vocal strain and extreme tiredness. Guy had to cancel his performances and rest. In that quiet time, he faced not just his physical limits, but also his emotional ones. He admitted later that he had been giving out more than he was taking in spiritually. The quietness became a valuable time for him to reflect and heal. Wes, on the other hand, was hurt by an online misunderstanding. Years before, he had offered encouragement to young musicians, some of whom later went into secular music. Someone took his private advice out of context and posted it online. Critics accused him of blurring the lines of his ministry, even though he hadn't done anything wrong. The negative reaction was quick and painful. Instead of fighting back, Wes chose to remain silent. He quietly shared that his heart had always been for the next generation and that he would continue to serve in silence. Their distance from each other wasn't out of anger, but out of a need to survive their own personal storms. Each man carried his own pain, unsure how to reach out to the other without adding to their burdens. A mutual friend explained that they weren't angry, just broken to talk. The retreat, in a neutral place without the pressure of cameras and audiences, became a place where healing could begin. No words were really needed, just the familiar, him, the tears, and the simple act of Guy putting his hand on Wes's shoulder. Brothers united in spirit. Today, they walk different paths but are still connected in their hearts. Guy's return to music is peaceful and thoughtful. Wes continues to help others with quiet dignity. There are no big tour or reunion albums yet, but their story has already found its victory, not in loud music, but in healing and grace. This isn't a story of scandal, but a testimony to the fact that even spiritual leaders can get weary and feel alone, but can find their way back to each other. In the end, Guy and Wes faced pressure and silence, and the weight of expectations, but their brotherhood never broke. The bright lights of fame might have dimmed, but their bond remained strong because the most important part of their story isn't what was lost, but what was quietly restored.